My uncle tried to domesticate a razor boar once. The only thing he managed to teach it was how to open doors and hate everyone. Cadet Crix barked a laugh, his mandibles clicking as he slapped his desk with two of his four hands. A ripple of amusement coursed through the lecture hall, but not from everyone. Second row center near the ventilation shaft sat the one student who hadn't cracked a smile all semester. Unit 23-7, commonly referred to by the others as Meat. No one really knew what species Meat belonged to. He'd arrived mid-cycle, approved by the Interplanetary Exchange Accords, and was slotted into the Exobiology Warfare Academy on Meritus Prime. His file was classified beyond the reach of cadet clearance levels, which naturally only deepened the curiosity. He looked soft, like someone had stuffed a prototype drone chassis with uncooked protein slurry and added 2 black marbles for eyes. Pale skin, only 2 arms, and hair that didn't adjust to UV spectrums. Utterly impractical. He wore his standard uniform correctly, but somehow still looked out of place, like someone had skinned a larva and taught it posture. The official term for his species was human. He called himself Grant. Crix nudged his neighbor. "Watch this," he whispered, then louder. "Hey, Meat! You got any killer wildlife stories from your mudball homeworld?" The room quieted slightly. Grant blinked slowly, then looked up. "Yeah," he said. "Once I saw a goose chase my cousin across a field. He tripped and broke his femur." There was a pause. Then laughter erupted again, louder this time. A goose? Some of them had seen geese in archive footage. Feathered, ground-bound herbivores barely a meter tall. Grant went back to his notebook, sketching something with methodical calm. Professor Thule arrived then, a veteran of the Virex uprisings and rumored to have personally survived a Pyrian bloodstorm. He activated the holo projector, and the walls flickered with the image of a coiled shadow beast from Kargoth Delta. Its chitin was razor-lined, its fangs measured in decimeters, and its mating call was known to rupture eardrums within a 6-meter radius. "These are not your common battlefield pests," Thule said in a voice that rumbled like plate tectonics. "The Deathworld-class predators we will review today are why full quarantine laws remain in place on several Class X planets. You will learn their biology, weaknesses, and, if applicable, last known locations." Another cadet raised his hand. "Professor, has anyone tamed a Deathworld species?" Thule looked at him with slow disdain. "You don't tame Deathworld species, Cadet Warwick. You outlive them, if you're lucky." Grant looked up again, just briefly. For the next 2 hours, Thule guided them through a living museum of nature's most efficient war machines. There was the Hex Lion of Rexir, which hunted in packs and used neural disruption pulses to disable prey. The Bonejaw Howler of Tyron 6, whose digestive tract dissolved metal. And the Skreeg, a creature composed of living tendrils and acid glands, believed extinct until it consumed a science outpost last year and left only a pile of boots. Each predator was more horrific than the last. The room stayed engaged, except for Grant, who flipped through his notebook in silence, occasionally underlining something or drawing what looked suspiciously like plumbing diagrams. When the session ended, the cadets filed out, still buzzing with gruesome facts. Crix lingered at the back with a few others, watching Grant drift toward the barracks corridor alone. "See that?" Crix muttered. "Guy's like a deflated fungus. Doesn't flinch at the Skreeg, doesn't laugh, doesn't eat in public. It's unnatural." Warwick nodded. "He scored perfect on last week's Predator response simulation." "He walked through the minefield," Crix snapped. "Just walked. Who does that?" Warwick shrugged. "Maybe he's good under pressure. Or maybe he's just wrong under the skin." Unknown to them, Thule was still at the front of the hall, one finger pressed to the biometric pad on his wrist console. He was watching a feed, a zoomed-in loop of Grant's desk. Not the face, not the eyes. The hand. Grant's left hand, the one that should have been holding a stylus. It had been tapping. Thule zoomed closer. The fingers weren't tapping randomly. They were tapping in bursts. 5 short, 2 long, 3 short, repeating. Thule frowned. Not Morse, not Garan script. Something older. Later that night, the dormitory hall was unusually quiet. The cadets had bunked early, their minds still humming from Deathworld stats and the shared thrill of dangerous knowledge. Grant sat alone in the gymnasium, beneath the sparring rings, cross-legged and still. The lights dimmed on a timer, but he didn't move. He just stared at the padded floor. Then he stood. He walked to the impact dummy, a reinforced alloy column wrapped in synthetic muscle layers designed to simulate exo-creature flesh. It could take a charge from a Varnic berserker without denting. Grant put one hand on it. He drew back, and then punched. The impact cracked like an atmosphere breach. The dummy's core sparked, tilted, and then fell over with a groan. Alarms triggered. Red lights flared. But Grant simply stood there, rubbing his knuckles. He exhaled once, then walked away. Professor Thull arrived 3 minutes later, escorted by security drones. He examined the collapsed training unit, crouched beside it, and touched the dented center. The alloy hadn't just buckled. It had fractured along a line of stress only possible from a kinetic blow. One punch, no visible weapon, no exosuit, just human muscle and bone. "Requisition footage logs," he said quietly. The drones hovered in place, and triple-checked the student registry for anomalies. By the time the drones left, Grant was already back in his bunk. He was awake, staring at the ceiling. On his desk was the drawing from earlier. It was not a plumbing diagram, not exactly. It was a schematic for a digestive system, not his own. The cafeteria on Meritus Prime didn't serve real meat, only protein facsimiles, extruded and textured to resemble the culinary traditions of a dozen species. But Grant still stirred his tray with a detached boredom, poking at the gelatinous mass as if he expected it to move. Across the hall, Crix sat with Warwick and 2 others, whispering over their nutrient packs. "Something's off," Crix said. "Thull pulled me after class yesterday, asked if anyone had seen Grant working with off-grid equipment." "Off-grid? Like what, he's brewing venom in the shower?" Warwick chewed a mouthful of moss bark chew and shrugged. "You're just upset meat scored better than you on the predator neutralization exam," Crix hissed, lowering his voice. "You didn't see the footage? One of the spar bots in the training bay caved in. Thull said it looked like a crash test, but Grant never logged any gym time." "Maybe he's just weird," Warwick muttered. "Number? He's deliberate. You ever watch how he walks? Perfect weight distribution. Arms always symmetrical. No wasted motion. That's not how people walk. That's how things walk when they've been trained to mimic people." Behind them, Grant stood, deposited his tray in the reclamation chute, and left without a word. Crix glanced over his shoulder. "You think he heard us?" "I think," Warwick said slowly, "if he had heard us, we wouldn't still be talking." That evening, Professor Thull locked his office and activated a Level 7 privacy barrier. The glass walls shimmered opaque. He accessed the student biometrics archive and scrolled to Grant. No homeworld listed, no kin. Arrival logs marked only with intergalactic integration code 9TRX-17, which translated to observation level clearance required, the kind normally reserved for prisoners, diplomatic ghosts, or classified species under psychobehavioral study. He tapped deeper. Grant's blood chemistry was unusual, iron-heavy, with metabolic acceleration factors that weren't naturally occurring. Enzyme activity suggested rapid healing. Neural response time was higher than any standard sapien species. But the real anomaly was skeletal density, 5.6 times the Academy average. Thull frowned. That kind of structure could take impacts a Kargoth trooper couldn't walk away from. He glanced to the side of the report. There were no medical flags, no injuries recorded, which meant that sparring dummy had fallen to a strike from a creature that wasn't even winded by it. He keyed in an override. A small message popped up. Restricted, human species, clearance level, Zeta, access logged. Thull leaned back. "What are you?" he whispered. Grant's bunkmates were out for field drills when the alarm buzzed softly on his desk terminal. Not a public alert, not Academy protocol. It was a transmission, one that bypassed the relay towers entirely. He tapped it open. Observe only. No engagement. He stared at the message for several seconds before typing a single reply. "They're already suspicious." The response came back within seconds. "Adjust behavior. Minimize exposure." He shut the terminal down and opened his locker. Inside, beneath his standard issue tunic, sat a sealed packet of strange metal. Not alien, Not from the academy. Human-forged. The kind only carried by operatives during deep surveillance missions. He touched it once, then closed the locker. 2 days later, the class was deployed for practical drills on Marnax Ridge, a controlled terrain simulation based on an actual Deathworld topography. The instructors were clear: survive 24 hours, maintain comms, and report encounters. By nightfall, 3 cadets had already triggered trauma beacons and been evac'd. Grant had wandered into one of the restricted quadrants alone. Grant's beacon just disappeared, Crix said, staring at his tracker. No signal loss warning, no motion, just gone. Warwick exhaled. You think something got him? Crix shook his head. I think he turned it off. The others looked at him. Why would he? Because, Crix said, rising to his feet and checking the charge on his sidearm. Whatever he is, he doesn't need a rescue. Meanwhile, deeper in the ravine, Grant crouched in the brush, eyes scanning the terrain. 2 skulkers, low-level predators designed to test cadet response time, crept through the rocks. He moved in silence. His steps didn't crunch the pebbles. His breath was barely audible. When one of the beasts lunged, he ducked beneath it and drove a fist into its thorax with enough force to rupture its internal hydraulic bladder. The second charged, and he pivoted, no panic, no delay, and crushed its windpipe with a short hook to the neck. He stood still afterward, wiping green fluid from his knuckles. Then he reached into the remains and pulled out one of the sensors implanted by the Academy for tracking beast behavior. He crushed it underfoot. Overhead, a surveillance drone whirred gently, unnoticed. In the control center, Thol stared at the feed, lips tightening. His aide leaned in. Should we pull him? Thol shook his head slowly. Let's see how far the creature wants to play. The next morning, the cadets regrouped at the ridge checkpoint, sunburned and scraped. A few were limping. One had wrapped his leg in synthetic vine after a misstep into a camouflage nest. None of them expected to see Grant there, sitting against a boulder, arms crossed, uniform clean. Crix froze mid-step. No way! Grant looked up and gave a nod. Morning. You stayed in the ravine? Warwick asked. Grant shrugged. Seemed quiet enough. Cadet Rin, who had slept on top of a broken detection beacon, muttered something about ghosts. Crix stepped closer, eyes narrowed. There were skulkers in that quadrant. 2, I tracked them before nightfall. Grant tilted his head. Must have missed me. The instructor drone descended, projecting a map showing every cadet's movement. Lines of motion danced across the terrain in bright neon threads. But Grant's path was oddly short, just a loop. Enter the ravine, stop, no exit, no detour, no fleeing predators, nothing. Yet both skulkers' signal trails had ended during the night, just stopped moving, sensors offline. Their last ping, right near Grant's position. The drone paused on that moment. Everyone could see it. Crix's jaw tensed. You were right there. Grant stood, brushing dust from his sleeves. I slept. Thol's voice came over the comm. Return to base. Debrief in 1 hour. Back at the academy, Thol compiled the final footage from the ridge. His office smelled of burned ozone from overworked processors. The surveillance drone had caught a partial visual during the skulker kill. Just enough to show the blur of motion and the force of impact. The feed cut out after a brief flicker of static. But it was enough. Grant didn't fight like a trained cadet. He didn't fight like anything native to the systems under the Accord. There was no hesitation, no defensive stance. He didn't dodge. He intercepted. Thol uploaded the footage to the secure channel with a single tag. Human anomaly confirmed. Contact pending. Later that week, the Academy hosted a mandatory seminar on Deathworld diplomatic failures. A soft attempt at reminding cadets that even monsters had cultures. Half the hall dozed behind their visors. The lights were low. The speaker was some bureaucrat from Sector 9, droning about misclassified planetary fauna and avoidable skirmishes. Grant listened without blinking. When the speaker reached the case of Vasic 4, a planet misflagged as a resource zone, later revealed to house an apex predator species with human-level intelligence. Grant raised a hand. The speaker paused. Yes, cadet? What happened to the Vasic population? The room grew a little quieter. The bureaucrat fidgeted with his clicker. Negotiations were attempted. Cultural misunderstandings escalated into conflict. Grant stared. So they were wiped out. The man coughed. Well, eventually yes, but under the emergency conditions and with full tribunal clearance. Grant didn't respond. He just lowered his hand again and sat still. Crix leaned over to Warwick. He knew already. He was testing the guy. That night, Crix couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the drone footage, about the strange calm Grant wore like a skin, the way the speaker had stuttered under his question, and something deeper, something he didn't like admitting. He wasn't sure he could take Grant in a fight, not just win. He wasn't sure he'd survive it. So against his better judgment, Crix did something he hadn't done since first year. He snuck into the records chamber. It took him 2 hours to bypass the logs. Grant's file was still under encryption, but there was a back door, buried under legacy data from the Integration Council. Crix keyed in the override. The screen blinked. Human Containment Directive, Class Red. Species, Homo sapiens. Planet of origin, Earth. Deathworld classification, MAX. Known threat, unpredictable behavioral patterns, extreme tolerance for trauma, high aggression thresholds under stress, capable of adapting to any hostile biosphere within 3 generations. Then the advisory. Do not engage without support. Do not trigger stress response. If cornered, prioritize distance. Crix read it twice. His palms were sweating. The humans weren't just accepted into the accord. They were monitored, studied, not because of fragility, but because even they weren't sure how dangerous one could be when pushed. And Grant, he wasn't just a cadet. He was one of them. Crix backed away from the terminal and killed the lights. He didn't sleep that night either. Elsewhere in a black-tinted chamber above the administration wing, Thul met with 2 off-world officials from the Accord. Their uniforms bore no insignia. Their eyes were sharp. Your report was correct, one said. This one's active, fully trained. Thul nodded. He's not reacting to provocations. He's observing. The other official narrowed his gaze. How close has he come to revealing? Too close, Thul said. The others suspect him. The taller one pressed a finger to his earpiece. Command recommends observation continue. Do not initiate contact. And for Star's sake, don't make him feel threatened. Why? Thul asked. Because we don't know what that would look like. Not yet. The final field exam was meant to simulate worst-case warfare scenarios. Ambushes, environmental collapse, power failure, and biohazard containment. For most cadets, it was the last hurdle before placement into specialized divisions. For Grant, it was the first time he'd shown even a flicker of interest. The exam site was built into the ruins of an old Varnic war dome. Steel skeletons jutted out of the soil like buried titans. Smoke generators simulated battlefield haze. Collapsing floors, heat pulses, feral drone patrols, and randomized terrain shifts ensured no plan would survive more than 5 minutes. There were no squads this time. Each cadet went in alone. Crix stood near the edge of the platform, helmet in hand, trying to steady his breathing. Grant stood 5 paces away, stretching his shoulders with quiet purpose. Warwick leaned in. You saw the file. What are we even doing here? Passing or failing, Crix muttered. Just like him. The buzzer sounded. One by one, they dropped into the maze. Grant's descent was silent. He landed in a crouch and rolled forward, barely stirring the ash that coated the floor. A moment later, an unstable beam above him groaned and collapsed, triggered by a decoy sensor. He didn't flinch. He just stepped aside. Instructors watched from the control tower. Professor Thul sat in the central seat, arms crossed. Surveillance drones fed him 12 perspectives at once. Every cadet was accounted for. Some were already panicking, trapped in collapsed zones, forced into decision loops, struggling with fake injuries. Except for Grant. He didn't just survive. He maneuvered. Every choice was precise. Every trap avoided. Every ambush dismantled before it even began. At one point, he reached a corridor where 2 combat drones awaited, armed with stun rounds and pattern recognition AI. The kind of challenge meant to stagger a normal cadet. Grant didn't fire. He sprinted. He charged directly at the first drone, leapt, grabbed its hull midair, and used it to bludgeon the second drone into the wall. The crowd of instructors went silent. "End the sim," someone muttered. "Not yet," Thul replied. Deep in the maze, Crix reached a clearing. Barely. One arm was limp, shoulder scorched from a plasma mine. His breathing rasped, but he was alive. Barely. Ahead of him, the extraction flare blinked red. One more sprint. He limped toward it and stopped. Grant was standing at the extraction point, not running, not hiding, standing. Crix swallowed. "You waiting for a medal?" Grant turned slightly. "Just figured I should talk to you before this ends." Crix didn't move. "Why?" "You've been watching me." "You broke a mech in half." Grant nodded. Crix hesitated. "What are you?" The silence stretched. Then Grant smiled, just slightly. "I'm from Earth." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm allowed to give." Something shifted in the air. A low rumble sounded under the floor. Simulated tremors. Another layer of difficulty. Thul was testing even now. Grant looked up. "They're watching. I shouldn't be talking." Crix raised his weapon, not to fire, just to have it between them. Grant didn't blink. "You're afraid of me." "I'm afraid of what I don't know." Grant looked at him, something flickering behind his eyes. "You think I'm a monster?" Crix didn't answer. "I've seen your files too," Grant said. "You're a pack creature, loyal, quick to anger, easy to provoke." Crix snarled. "So what? You studied us?" Number I grew up around worse. The extraction flare turned green. Countdown initiated. Grant stepped back. "You'll pass. You fought well." Crix narrowed his eyes. "Why are you here?" Grant looked toward the dome ceiling. "Because eventually you'll need someone who's already been through the worst parts of the galaxy and survived." Crix didn't lower his weapon. Then the floor under him cracked. Simulated fault line. A new twist in the test. Crix dropped with a cry, barely catching the edge. His legs dangled over the pit. A blast of heated air surged up from below, simulating molten terrain. He scrabbled for grip and saw Grant crouch beside him. "Don't," Crix hissed. "This is a trap. You pull me up, you fail. I don't care." With one hand, Grant grabbed his arm and lifted him with ease. They tumbled onto the floor as the countdown ended. Extraction lights flared. Test complete. 3 days later, final rankings were posted. Grant was listed first. No surprise, Crix was third. Warwick just below that. But the news spreading around the barracks wasn't about scores. It was about the meeting held behind closed doors. The one involving Grant. The one where nobody saw him leave afterward. And then, just like that, he was gone. No transfer papers, no reassignment logs, not even a nameplate left behind. "Where'd he go?" Warwick asked. Crix stared at the empty bunk across the room. "Somewhere worse." "Worse than this?" "Worse than here," Crix corrected. "Somewhere that even we won't be sent." They didn't talk much after that, but sometimes Crix would catch himself glancing at the edge of a corridor or the corner of a room, half expecting to see a quiet figure standing still, watching. Not out of threat, not anymore. Out of readiness, because Grant wasn't a beast. He was the thing that survived the beast, and for now that was enough.